Mr. Smith has developed a niche interest in remote and rural locations and sees his role as a collaborative facilitator, often working with project owners and community leaders, legislators, and citizen groups to address unusual energy and power concerns. Mr. Smith earned his BSIE from Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta and his MEM, which is a Master's of Engineering Management from Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. In addition, he completed resident training for sales engineers through the Train Company, La Crosse, Wisconsin. He is called on regularly to share his expertise as a presenter and lecturer on the subject of offsetting and reducing dependence on fossil fuels, and as a spokesperson for Hearst Boiler. With that, welcome, Craig Smith.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it very much. First of all, I want to just tell you that we originally had 6 speakers. There's 4. One of them had a little run-in with a deer on the way here near the airport in Spokane, so he has a broken foot, and the deer didn't make it. So, and then there's another fellow, his name is Shashi Shastri. He got stuck in the Middle East on his way here on security reasons. He won't be here either. So I'm going to start out and tell you a little bit about the equipment and systems that will use biomass. Our subject for the panel today is biomass, the benefits of using it for power and heat in Alaska. There's really three main systems that I see for an area like Alaska. There's 3 types of boiler systems, boiler gasifier systems. The first one is just mainly a hot water boiler used for heating only. Can be steam. Hot water is a lot more prevalent, and they're in the smaller sizes. And then the larger used for electricity and heat. We found that anywhere from 100 kW up to about 1,500 to 2,000 kW or 2 megawatts. The most efficient way to do that, most cost-effective way, is to use a biomass gasifier and then feed that syngas, that low BTU syngas, into an engine. And the gasifier itself is not really the magic. It's in the engine and how you deal with tars and so forth. One of the systems that we've seen that works very well is using a 2-stroke engine. So tars in the fuel, getting that out is not an issue. The larger systems, this would pretty much take care of the biggest systems, except for a couple of plants maybe in Alaska. And that would go from 1,500 or 2,000 kW up to maybe 15,000 or 15 megawatts. And the most efficient way to do that is with a biomass boiler generating steam and then going from the steam, taking the steam and running it to a turbine generator to generate electricity. If you need additional heat, then you can use back pressure off the turbine for heat, for whatever reason. This, on the smaller systems, that just shows you the types, that is size and BTUs at the top, and then the different types of buildings where you use those various sizes. And on the smaller ones, we usually say it's about 440,000 BTUs, 300,000 BTUs, something in that range up to about 6,800,000, something along those lines. Fuel choices, you can use densified fuel. You can use densified fuel like a briquette. I'm going to pass this around so everybody can see this. We're using this at the visitor center in Ketchikan. That's the main fuel for that particular boiler. You can use briquettes, pellets, or wood chips, just standard wood chips. And the key thing about the smaller boilers, they're usually in buildings that don't have a big maintenance crew. So it's really important that you have automatic fuel feeding, soot blowing, ash extraction, all automatically, so you don't have to have like an industrial or utility grade boiler system where you have to have a boiler operator there 24 hours. So that's really kind of the key for the smaller systems. This is the one that's in the visitor center. That's a 27 horsepower wood chip pellet pot boiler. It was built specifically to go in an existing building. It's 8 foot 4 inches tall, so it fit in an existing storage room next to the boiler plant. And the key thing here on all these different systems is the amount of consumption of fuel to generate whatever you're looking for. In this case, we're saying 250 pounds of 35% moisture fuel for 1 million BTUs of heat. That's just a benchmark, so you get an idea how to compare it to the other boiler systems. There's the boiler system, the entire boiler system that's in the plant, the Hearst plant in South Georgia. It shows the various components as they sit in the visitor center kitchen. By the way, the boiler room wall has a window that's about 3 feet tall by, I think it's 25 or 30 feet long. And all the people that go in the visitor center, the last stop is to look at the biomass boiler. So this just shows some of the other systems. That's actually a forced air furnace, wood-fired forced air furnace on the top. That's a little, takes pellets, and you can put that and retrofit an existing boiler, gas or oil boiler, and put that burner on it and use that to use the fuel. And then this is just a standard steam or hot water pellet boiler as well here. And that shows the piping of how those particular heating systems, how they're set up. It's very similar to, it's the same piping system that would, you'd have for gas or oil boiler. Now this is the intriguing system that we're actually partnering with a group in Asia that's bringing this technology here. And this is a biomass gasifier, downflow gasifier, makes a syngas. And that syngas is piped or ported over to an engine. You can put in a standard 2-stroke engine on a new installation, and it'll burn approximately 0.8 tons per megawatt. Megawatt's 1,000 kilowatts. So that's an important number to remember when we look at the steam system. This just shows how the building would be set up and how the components are configured in there. Another picture of this, that building that houses the 1 megawatt system is about 100 feet long and 30 feet wide, 25 feet tall. Give you an idea. These are on the larger systems. We use biomass to generate steam, and then the steam goes to a turbine. You can see here that it takes 1.2 tons per hour per megawatt of electricity. So that's 33% more fuel to get the same megawatt out. So the efficiency on the gasifier and engine is actually higher from a fuel standpoint. The gas that it generates is low BTU, so if you have an existing engine, it has to be derated by about 25 or 50%, depending on whether you're just retrofitting the diesel or putting in a but it does use less fuel, and the combustion system has the same thermal efficiency. The difference is the engine versus the turbine. Engine is better and more efficient than the turbine. Okay, this just shows a standard system, steam generating system. The fuel comes in on this pile, and it gets augered up into the boiler, and then you generate steam there. Steam goes to the turbine, which is on the end, and then the pollution control would be right at the back end of the boiler up the stack. Just a standard schematic. And there's just a cutaway of what the boiler looks like. That one happens to be a reciprocating rate. The fuel is dry. That's about an 80% efficiency system, so that's a very efficient system for sure. This is how the fuel gets augered into, that's actually a walking floor, so the fuel gets put onto that floor, and then it gets ratcheted up, and then it's conveyed to the metering bin of the boiler and burned that way. So this is all automatically dumped once you dump the fuel on that walking floor. That's a picture up there. I just want to give you that for size. That boiler on the left, that happens to be at Shaw Carpet in North Georgia. That's a 5 megawatt, round numbers, boiler. And you can see the guy there that's at the bottom of that ladder. That boiler is about 45 feet tall to the top of the steam. So I'll give you an idea of the size. These are in the steam system. These are the components that are utilized in the system. That's up on the upper left-hand corner. That's an air-cooled condenser. Doesn't use water. More common in areas where they have water. It's a surface condenser. That's required for the turbine. And then that's a condensing turbine on the lower left and a back pressure turbine on the upper right. This is that would be about a 20 megawatt plant. That's for an ethanol plant, and that is about 3.5 acres. It takes for that all that material that makes up the plant. First boilers come by our booth, and you can see anything there. Also, just project schedule, depending on the size of the project. Small heating systems, probably something in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 months. And then the bigger system, for instance, we have a contract on a 10 megawatt plant just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And that's about a 14-month construction schedule for that job. So that'll give you an idea of how long it takes and all the various steps required to put the plant in. Okay, and that's our trademark. Burning leaf. Okay, I just want to give you an overview of the system and the types of equipment so we can go in and use the biomass material. Now I'd like to introduce some of the other speakers that will tell you about the different types of fuel that are available and how we go about it. Claire Doig has worked professionally as a forester since 1994. Actually born in Sitka. He's provided forest management, land management guidance to native corporations, the Alaska Mental Health Trust Land Office, and the University of Alaska Land Office. He's experienced timber appraisal, harvest, sales administration and development, stewardship, planning, and biomass resource assessment. Claire received a BS at the University of Washington Forest Resource Management, holds an SAF certified forest designation. His dedication to state-of-the-art forest management is supported by continuing education courses through the University of Washington.
Thank you, Greg. It's a real pleasure and honor for me to be here today. Over the last 3 or 4 years, since I've gotten involved in this biomass assessment business, it's something that's become very exciting to me because I can see the local benefits to these projects. You're keeping money in the communities, you're creating jobs in the community, and in most cases, we hope that the quality of life in the community is improving. The first question is, are there any trees? And, I've been doing resource assessments for biomass everywhere from out by Kobuk to down by Heidelberg. And last summer, I went out to St. Mary's thinking that I was going to run into a bunch of trees, and found out that the vegetation there was just not quite big enough for any sort of a scale of harvesting operation for biomass. Really the first consideration is what fuel is available. You do have woody vegetation there, but there's just not enough trees per acre or for any unit to really do anything on a sustainable basis. When you get down along the river, there's willow and there's poplar. In this particular situation, the community was basically getting their firewood from driftwood in the Yukon River. And the primary species that everybody wanted were the pine and the birch. And there's still a quantity of cottonwood coming down the river. So one possible solution would be to, so that you're not competing with the local population for their residential firewood, to try to use the cottonwood for, if you can use a cordwood boiler or something like that. It's probably not realistic for home heating system. This is a stand of willow down by Galena. When I first went to the Galena area, I kind of overlooked this area and went back, and the nice thing about it, willow trees normally in most of Alaska are just little small bushes, but these are 4 or 5 inch trees and 20, 30 feet tall, and probably 1,000 to 2,000 stems per acre. So there you're starting to get enough volume per acre that you can possibly economically harvest that and chip it and use it for a biomass heating system. And that's actually what's being proposed in Galena. This is not the only fuel source there, but this is just one. These are spruce trees near Toke. Jeff will recognize these. These are some of the stuff that he manages. the stems range from an inch in diameter on a lot of these stands up to 6, 8 inches in diameter. They're really too small for realistic recovery of saw logs, but it's great biomass material. It's good for either firewood or chipping, and it's good tonnage per acre. So it's, and plus the fact that the harvesting conditions are just ideal. This is probably one of the best areas to be looking at this kind of project. This is down on the west side of Prince of Wales Island. This is not a good export quality timber stand. This is what we always called scrub timber down there. You've got yellow cedar, red cedar, spruce, lodgepole pine, and hemlock. And there's nothing wrong with the combination of species, but they just happen to be growing on basically muskeg. And but even though you can't use it for saw timber, a lot of this wood, it is realistic to think that you could go in there and harvest some of it for biomass. And at the same time, if you can get a saw log out of it, you'd want to use that for the higher value, which helps your cost of recovering the material. Now, the question is there vegetation suitable for wood biomass or firewood? Willow and alder, basically, generally, they're very low tonnage per acre and typically grow as bushes. The tonnage per acre is critical because you need a certain level or volume of wood per acre when you're harvesting to be able to economically recover your costs. Aspen and balsamic poplar are higher tonnage per acre. Poplar, surprisingly enough, has got the highest BTU per acre due to its fast growth. In some of the projects I've been working on, we're targeting aspen and balsamic poplar because of their ability to potentially in 40 to 50 years have another crop, and it improves the sustainability of it. White spruce, tamarack, Sitka spruce, hemlock are also suitable for higher wood value products. So the benefit of working with these species is that you can take your higher value wood product out and get a higher return for that at the same time using the residuals that are left over for your biomass project. Critical information: species, the size, and the density of trees. Size, generally we measure the diameter of the trees at breast height, in other words 4.5 feet off the ground, and measure the height of the tree, the density of the trees, the number of trees per acre, the volume per acre. Like if you're talking about white spruce trees, you're looking probably at a higher volume per acre than if you're looking at, say, aspen trees. And then the size of the harvest area to be managed, the acres. If you're looking for a sustainable project, for a community-sized project, you're looking in the thousands of acres needed for a project. In order to determine the annual allowable cut under what would be a sustainable level of harvest, you need to know the growth rate and the mortality of the trees that you're looking at. This is just a picture of a forester out there measuring a tree. The products, we talked about cordwood, is basically simple firewood, and being anywhere from a foot long to 2 or 3 feet long. On the right here, this is ground wood from the chipper or the grinder and tote. You can see in the center there, that's a quarter. A lot of those, the particle size is about the size of a quarter or twice the size of a quarter in length, but it's very narrow. It's a very good fuel wood. A lot of the systems we talked about, chipping or grinding, a lot of the systems will use either just a pup. Then it comes to the matter of, are these trees free? Well, somebody owns the trees, and generally they're not free. If you're looking at state lands or native corporation lands, village corporation lands, somebody's going to have to be looking at what's the value of those trees, and usually they'll look at comparable sales, or do a residual value appraisal. In other words, what's the value of the end product minus all the cost to get there, plus profit and risk, and then the number that drops out the bottom will be your stumping value. It's not realistic to expect that trees aren't going to cost anything. Unfortunately, on a lot of these projects, the value of the trees is not enough to cover all of the management costs. So usually you have to use a little bit of judgment and negotiating, because you have to consider management costs as part of the cost of obtaining your wood, because you want to be able to manage these trees in the future. And if you don't do replanting, the scarification, replanting, and long-term management of this area, you're not going to have a resource down the road. It's not going to be sustainable. Sources of information. Basically, over the last 21 years or so, the state of Alaska's had a forest stewardship program. The Tanana Chiefs Conference has done a lot of inventories and forest stewardship plans in their region, plus some of the areas outside. So there's quite a bit of information for some of the villages. There's timber inventories that they've developed. The state also has done a lot of inventories in areas. They've done inventories on their own state forests. They've done inventories on lands on Otna, lands around Glen Allen. They just did an inventory last year, stuck down by Cordova. So there's quite a bit of information available. The state Division of Forestry has also done biomass assessments, and as well as the Tanana Chiefs. So, first needs to do a little bit of research before they commission a new study, because there is a lot of information out there. Then other sources include vegetation mapping by Land Fire Program and mapping by the Ducks Unlimited, which is basically won't tell you the volumes per acre necessarily, but it'll tell you the vegetation types, which is, early part of the process of doing the assessment. And then another one is the native allotment inventories prepared by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Those allotments are all over the state of Alaska. So if you don't have good specific area information in a rural area, if you look at the allotment information, you can correlate that with areas of similar type timber and get, some reasonable estimates of species and volume and so forth. Also, the Natural Resource Conservation Service is another source of information. One of the biggest considerations also is who owns the lands. If you're around a rural community, right in the community, and usually right around the community, the lands are owned by either private individuals or the community. And for a lot of communities, if they have a native village corporation, they've got 14C3 lands, which is up to 1,280 acres around the community. Outside of that would be village corporation lands. Plus you have regional corporation lands, and then you also have native allotments. And those are generally the most realistic areas to look to be able to work out an agreement on managing those lands for biomass. Forest Service in the Chugach region and southeast, Fish and Wildlife Service with the different reserves and refuges, and of course the Bureau of Land Management. Just from my perspective, it's easier to work with native corporations than with any of the government entities. The second easiest is the state of Alaska, and probably the third easiest would be the Bureau of Land Management. And don't even talk to me about the Forest Service. Conclusion. Basically, the first consideration in developing a forest biomass-based wood energy project is the forest resource available and associated costs of converting it to a usable fuel. You need a forest inventory, you need a timber or biomass appraisal, and you need a long-term written contract with the owner of the land and the timber. Thank you very much.
Thanks much, Blair. I appreciate that. Next speaker is Jeff Hermans. He's a forester for the Department of Natural Resources in the state of Alaska. He's been involved in forestry management in Alaska for many years, and he's collaborated actually with my company, Andrews Boiler, regarding biomass in Alaska as the best choice for renewable energy for both heat and power generation. He specializes in area expertise in his long-term planning and municipal life safety issues. He's the first person that I met when I came to Alaska several years ago. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I was actually surfing on the internet looking for boiler dealers when we started looking at the Toke School thing. That was 7 years ago now, and I was looking on the internet and looked up him somehow, and he ended up coming up here, and the rest is history. But also Galen Messersmith, and I went over to the Toke School and I said, "You got to look at these boilers." And now the Toke School has been operating for several years successfully. But I don't know what you think of when you think of your forest. I mean, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of our forest? Anybody?
Trees.
Trees. But I mean, what about trees? I mean, is it just shelter for wildlife? Is it is it the beauty of it, the aesthetics of it? I mean, what do you think about when you think of our forest? I mean, how many people think of our forest, when they think of our forest, they think of energy? And that's what we want, that's what I would like to start getting people to think about. This is the forest fire that we had in Toke 3 years ago, and look at the energy coming off of that. And I have the unique situation in Toke where I'm responsible for the fire suppression as well as the resource program, so I get to see the energy from our forest fires, and I also get to be involved in the harvest of energy for the school, the homes, all that kind of stuff. So, we started off 7 years ago, and we really didn't know how much energy was in our forest. We really didn't. I mean, everybody's been out cutting firewood for eons, right? But how many people really have quantified how much energy is in our forest? And the conventional thinking of the day, as it turns out, was very low. And we went out and we started cutting trees, and we started measuring them and weighing them. And actually, this is some of the work that I did with Greg. We actually sent off samples to a national laboratory and got the burn test back. And the results back was phenomenal. It really was. There was essentially 10 times more energy per acre than what we had thought before. And you look at the fires, and you think about how much energy is in our wildfires, but you look at our standing forest, and most people don't think of energy when they think of our forest. So, I mean, why biomass is good? The realm that we've moved into in Toke is actually the benefits that we're looking at is the reduction in risk from wildfires, and we've spent a lot of time on to that end. Jobs, the Toke School, they ended up hiring 3 teachers with the money that they saved from their biomass project there. We've actually been able to sustainably fund our fire crew based on the fuel reduction and that tie with fuel reduction with our biomass and our wood energy. Lower energy costs, and of course, it helps out our loggers. you know, but like everything that was said earlier today, you know, that money stays in the local community, you know, but the cleaner air, and a big one that we just discovered as well as, you know, we had a big wind event last September, and this wind event blew down over 1 million acres between Tok and Delta. 1 million acres within a few hours hit the ground. And we're like, now what do we do? You know, and we're hoping that biomass is going to be one of the solutions to help us get the forest cleaned up. So, you know, again, it's that connection between fire and biomass that I really like to establish. You know, I mean, the reason this house survived is because it had some defensible space. You know, but again, you look at the energy of that fire. You know, look at the energy of that wood in Alaska here. You know, this one didn't have any work done to it. They hadn't removed the fuel from around the home and they didn't survive, you know. So in Tok, we're really big into trying to make our homes safe from wildfire. Well, what does that have to do with biomass? Well, what we're doing is we're harvesting biomass by the use of our fire crews, and we're taking that biomass to the Tok school. And the Tok school has burned successfully for the last, 4 years now, and has been 100% on fuel reduction wood. And, you know, and if we hadn't have had that fuel reduction, it would have been very different for our Tok school. But it's saved us a tremendous amount of money, and it's allowed us to do so much more work helping to make the community safe from wildfire. So there's a really unique relationship there. So this is what most of the roads in Tok look like. I mean, that's how blind they are with fuel. I mean, how would you like to drive down that road if it were on fire? Pretty scary stuff, huh? And so what we're doing is we're taking that fire crew and we're going down and we're removing the fuel from away, you know, away from these roads to try and make it safe to get in and out during the case of a fire here. But you know, biomass has so many, you know, other benefits, and one of the benefits again is you know, the projects that we're doing, we're able to hire our fire crew to go out and do fuel reduction and use that material for biomass. And so we have the Tanana Chiefs fire crew, which we're very proud of in Tok, and they're one of the better saw crews in the state now, and it's because we've spent huge amount of time out there cutting fuel in these fuel reduction and producing biomass. But the cool thing is we've done it in such a way where all the fuel that we've had from our fuel reduction, we've been able to harvest it, and we haven't wasted any of it, and we've taken it to the Tok school, and that, again, that's what solely heated our school. So, but the training these guys have gotten has been pretty profound. But I think that the reason I show you all this is we can take the same model and we can take it to most any village throughout Alaska. You know, we can go out and we can train people. I don't know how that happened. Oh, sorry about that. But we can take the same model. We can go out to most any village within the state, within the interior, and we can train young men and women how to correctly run chainsaws, how to directionally fall timber, and how to do it in such a way that you get production where you could actually supply the entire village's energy supply, you know, for an entire year. And you know, most people think, well, I know how to run a chainsaw. You know, I've been running a chainsaw since I was little. Well, there's a big difference between going out and falling individual trees and falling enough to feed your home versus producing enough energy, harvesting timber, to produce, you know, enough energy for the entire village. You know, and the efficiency of what you can do if you're properly trained and know how to do it is amazing. So, but we really have a system down. But you see the dog hair spruce, you know, most people would think, well, that's not even firewood. But we've been able to successfully do this by hand and include some mechanization and become very efficient at it. We just competed in a national grant called the WUI grant, and we're in it. You're competing against all the western states, and we just put in a grant for Tok, and we were successful in getting that for $300,000. And so we're going to have another grant, hopefully if the federal government comes through with the funding, of course. Big question there now, but $300,000 worth of fuel reduction out cutting and removing trees. What do you think that means to the Tok school for the next, 5 years? I mean, that's all, gonna be really cheap, affordable wood for the Toke School. And it's gonna make our dollars for the community go a lot further here, so. But, we teach them the whole 9 yards. And it's just really neat seeing these young men that start off not knowing anything and being able to teach them how to go out and successfully harvest trees, biomass. So, but again, most people would look at that, and we were told when we first started this out, you guys don't have anything there because your trees are too small, and you can't use all the limbs, you can't use all the needles and stuff, and we proved all that completely wrong. And so we do whole tree harvesting, and we use what I refer to as the guts, feathers, and all of a tree. And we put the whole chicken in the soup there. And we had people telling us, well, you got to go out, you got to debark them, you got to delimb them. You can't have any bark in those chips because that's going to mess up the boiler. It's a bunch of bunk. It is. And you got to get through all of those misinformation. Because if we would have listened to all those people, we would have never done a project in Toke. And we would have never been to the point where we are now. But you see how we bundle the wood right there? And, that was done mechanically, but we do the exact same thing with our fire crews. And that's where you start to get into the efficiency of what we're doing. So, but that's the machine that we combine with our hand felling. It's just a simple grapple skidder. It's an old 518 cat skidder that you can purchase for about 20 grand, But you combine that with hand felling, and it's amazing what you can do. It's amazing how much wood you can move. So, that's one of our fuel reduction projects in Toke. And the amount of timber that they put down within just a few weeks with the Tannerau Chief's crew was amazing. And all that wood ended up being in decks. And that's all future wood for our biomass facility in Toke. So, but at first when we started out, I told him, I said, well, I want you to go out and directionally fell this patch of wood. Well, what do you think directionally felling means to, an 18, 20-year-old kid? Well, you fall the tree in any direction it falls. Well, no, that's not what we're talking about, because if the timber's all crisscrossed, it's going to be a mess, and it's going to be twice as expensive or 4 times more expensive to harvest. And so once they got down the concept of falling these trees, just like, perfectly every time, our production just went way up and off the charts, So that's our typical decks in Toke. Right now we probably have in the neighborhood of, I think, around 150 of those decks around Toke. I get to see in communities and they're starving for wood. And they don't have any wood put up from year to year. And it's very frustrating for me, for a production forester, to hear that, because there's really not any excuse for that. This wood is all what I consider money in the bank, right? It's sitting there waiting for next year or the year after next when we're going to put it through the grinder or use it for cordwood. I let people go out and they cut firewood off of these decks. They carve the firewood off, and the percentage of wood that we lose for the biomass is really minuscule. But it's supplying firewood for the community as well as biomass for our Toke School. And the other thing is, this wood is drying, it's curing. All the needles are going to fall off when we go to process it. So, Sean Skillings with AEA this morning, he said now you can use harvested wood for your match for your biomass project. That's pretty huge. And that's actually one of the reasons why we got the Toke School funded, is because when they first came to the Toke School at AEA, we had decks of wood all around the school. And they were pretty impressed by that. But this is, a typical piece of Toke, but notice that road that goes straight up the screen right there. I mean, that was one of our fuel reduction projects. But, look at the sea of biomass that we have there. This is that same road after the fuel reduction project. I don't know if you can really tell much, but you can tell, that we went through and we made that road safe for people to get out safely. But that road is completely lined with these big decks right here. See these right here? All the way up there. that's all wood that we won't use for probably 4 years. You know, so we're harvesting well in advance, years into the future. You know, and again, there's that relationship between the fuel reduction and the biomass. So, you know, that's what we're trying to prevent. You know, we're trying to deal with our fire risk issue in Toke, and the incredible threat that we have. You know, and so we're, you know, it's a little bit at a time, and we're working on it. You know, but you know, again, we're just trying to make the what progress we can. But we've done over 100 homes of what we call senior citizens in Toke, where we go in and we remove the fuel from around their home. And again, all of that wood that we're harvesting, we're not wasting any of that. We're taking it all to the Toke school. So, you know, there's another example of the fuel reduction project on the north side of Toke. That was mostly all done mechanically. But that's approximately a 300-foot fuel break that we have around the north side of Toke. And when we started out, everyone said, people won't go for that. You know, they'll throw a fit, they won't let you do it. You know, they won't put up with clear cutting. Well, we never had a single phone call from this entire project of someone, and this is all private property. To the right there, to the right side of the road, that's all private property. It's state land that borders up against it. And, you know, and all of this wood, the school is working from east to west, and they're working through all of these decks, chipping that. And so they have at least 3 more years under contract with the Division of Forestry working through those decks. This is the communication tower in Toke that was the troopers, forestry, EMS, DOT, all of the state agencies. That was our tower right there. And you can see the fuel that was right up and underneath of that tower. If that tower would have torched, we would have had no emergency communication at all. But all of that wood that was harvested from that, you can still see some of the decks right there. You can see the log loader and the rotor chopper right there. All of that wood was all then taken over to the Toke School and utilized. So this is a little piece of what it looks like after we're done with some of it. I think it looks pretty darn nice. So a lot of what we're trying to do is we're trying to convert these big spruce stands over to aspen stands that are fire, you know, resistant. So real fun little thing. I don't know if you guys have seen this. I know Chris probably gets tired of seeing this. But you know, a lot of people, they you know, I'm just trying to put it in terms that people can relate with. So 1 gallon of fuel oil has 139,000 BTU, right? Well, we've done our research. We went out and did destructive sampling, and we now know that 1 acre of fuel, like in the Toke area, has about 548 million BTU. 1 acre. That's pretty phenomenal. So when you divide that by the 139,000 BTU per gallon of fuel oil, that's 1 acre equivalent of the forest has 3,947 gallons of fuel oil per acre. That's a phenomenal figure. Think about that for a minute. So I want you to look around the room and imagine a jug of fuel oil sitting every 5 foot square, all over the room. And that's the fuel oil equivalent of the forest in Toke. And Toke doesn't have the best forest. I mean, Delta and Fairbanks have twice the forest that we do. But just to give you some perspective, you know, so next time when you're driving down the road and you look out at the forest, you know, think about the forest, you know, think about those gallons of fuel oil sitting out there. It really starts to change, you know, what you start thinking of. So, you know, if you put $4 per gallon price tag on that, and this is for that Toke stand right there. We have about 40,000 acres in Toke of this fuel that we live in. You know, at $4 a gallon, that's $615 million. At $60 per ton and 60 tons per acre, that's $140 million worth of biomass. I mean, these are all sound, proven numbers. So, you know, again, people said, well, you can't harvest, you know, small wood, you know, with conventional logging equipment. Well, that's just bunk. You can use conventional logging equipment for the wood that we have, and it works very effectively. So, this is what I wanted to show you as far as that relationship again. of the biomass project in Toke to the Division of Forestry, to the community as far as hazardous fuel reduction. You know, AEA was talking about the benefit of these biomass projects to the community. Well, the community just, you know, the benefit back to the Toke community with hazardous fuel reduction with the Toke School is over $1 million. You know, I mean, I worked my butt off to go out and get these grants for fuel reduction. And that biomass project, that's what it's going to mean for fuel reduction for us, you know. So, you know, we went out, we've got the equipment, and, you know, we're making it happen. So, the Toke School, you know, essentially it's about a $200,000 savings right now between electricity and heat. And they've hired 3 new teachers, and all that money from all that savings stays right in the community. They're no longer writing the bill to the oil company. The savings just in the heat and the electricity, conservatively at today's oil prices, is going to be over $6 million. So, for a little Toke School. Yeah, and you know, they love biomass so much they grind chips and put them in the hockey rink, you know, so. But that's what I refer to as the guts, feathers, and all. See that tree right there going in? Needles, limbs, everything? And see the fuel coming out? That's ready to burn right into the boiler. People were really concerned about smoke from a biomass boiler. That picture is at 40 below. All you see coming out the stack is just steam. That was the biggest concern with our biomass project in Toke when we were talking about this. They said, you're going to smoke out the entire community. Well, it just hasn't happened. And actually, the wood boiler, you can see that smoke pouring out over on that left side right over there. See that, I don't know if I get this, where's your pointer right there? Oh. But, that right there is from one of those outdoor wood boilers. Compare that right there with what's coming out right here. And we're burning 10 times as much, the amount of wood. I mean, that's these new Hearst boilers and stuff that we're talking about. That's what we're talking about right there. Compare the, you know, the air pollution of a forest fire with a biomass boiler. You know, it's an interesting comparison. But the Toke School just finished a big greenhouse project, and now they're going to start growing food at the Toke School as well from the biomass. Pretty cool stuff. You know, and this is some of what we're talking about is actively managing our forests. I mean, this is the point that we're getting to is we got to actively manage our forest. And so, you know, we've had the governor out to Toke to look at biomass. A lot of the legislatures have been out, and, you know, people are getting on board with this. You know, so the big thing is now we're looking at generating electricity and power in Toke, and we've had a request for a 25-year contract. We went through the entire public process, and the public essentially said, yes, let's do this. And so we completed the public process, and we offered the sale competitively. Unfortunately, they weren't ready to bid on it yet. They're still trying to finish up their feasibility study. You know, but we're hoping that someday soon in the future, we're going to generate all of our electricity and power in Toke from biomass. And the savings would be tremendous because it would mean $100 million over 25 years at today's oil prices. So, anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Just a little side note, those tests we ran several years ago, we went to 7 sites and we did double sample tests at 7 different locations, and then we ran it through the grinder. I bagged it up, sent it to the lab. The highest moisture content we had on any of those 7 sites was 28%. Most biomass boilers are designed to burn 50 to 55% moisture content fuel. I'm from the lower 48 in the Midwest, and we always, I remember growing up, you'd always hear about all the wildfires that happened in California. Wow, terrible, terrible, terrible. Well, they would lose, over the last 10 years, 2 to 3 million acres a year to wildfires. Alaska loses 4 to 6 million acres a year to wildfires. Largely because a matchstick is about 16 to 18% moisture, and the stuff standing that's green was 28%. So it burns much faster and everything else when it's at that low moisture content. So just a little food for thought. Our next speaker is Nathan Lejeski. He's forest manager for Chugachmute. He holds a master's degree in forestry and a certified forester. Nathan has extensive experience managing federal trust programs on native trust lands in Alaska, developing and deploying forestry inventory, GIS analysis, and project management, including land management planning, wildfire crew administration, and applied research projects. Nathan has been involved in the development of the Port Graham biomass project for the last 4 years. The project is now in the engineering and design phase, and construction is supposed to begin, I think, next summer.
Well, thanks for having me here. I'm going to try to keep my talk out of the technical details and show you more pictures and more storytelling. I was asked to talk about some of the community concerns in Port Graham. And here's a picture from the air of Port Graham. Port Graham is located about 25 air miles southeast of Homer. And you can see we have a lot of trees around. And the other thing I want to point out is there's a fish cannery here in Port Graham, and also that the Port Graham Corporation has clear-cut a lot of their timber, and that's kind of some of the things that have happened there in the past. But we first got into biomass because of the cannery. The cannery burnt down and was rebuilt, I think, in 1996. And sometime in the mid-2000s, the price of diesel got too high, and the Port Graham is actually on the grid. We get electricity through Homer Electric Association, but the three-phase power that's needed to run the cannery, they had to generate with diesel. And the cost of diesel was too expensive, and they shut the cannery down. So my predecessor in my position, is now my boss, got the idea, oh, we have tons of wood here. We've done the inventory and the feasibility studies and the resource assessments like Claire was talking about, and the wood's there, and I'm not going to get into the details of that, but why don't we turn the wood into power? And let's put in a big system that'll generate 1 megawatt of power, and it might take 500 or 600 acres of harvesting a year to support it. So one of the first concerns for the community, well, was the energy cost, and that it's $6 a gallon now. I know we're not the cheapest in the state, we're not the most expensive, but I guess it could be pretty typical. Like I said, that cannery couldn't reopen, and one of the reasons is because we can deal with higher costs of energy, but nobody wanted to invest the money when they need to have their investment pay off in 15 years when they don't know what's going to happen with the price of diesel in the next 15 years. And it wasn't just the cannery. We also have a gravel pit that is going to run some rock crushers, and we also have some oil rigs that have been docking in Port Graham, all who need this three-phase electricity. So we got into the biomass because we think we can generate electricity from biomass at a similar price to the current electrical prices, but that price will be consistent for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. It's not going to be tied to oil prices. So here's another picture of Port Graham, and you can see all the wood. And here's I think this is the Spartan oil rig that's drilling in the Cook Inlet, and I've heard that this winter there's going to be 2 oil rigs docked in Port Graham Bay, so getting some three-phase electricity here would be great. But one of the community's concerns was you need to harvest 500 to 600 acres of timber a year to generate this electricity. We don't like that amount of harvesting. We've already had a bunch of clear cutting in the past. And so folks don't like clear cuts. This is what our Sitka spruce forests look like. And the Timber Cruise data shows there's roughly 80 to 100 tons of fuel per acre. And I don't know, maybe Jeff can convert that to oil for you, but it's more than towcats. But here's a picture of a clear cut about 15 years after the fact. And the trees are growing back. There's probably more trees in this picture than there were in the last picture I showed you, but you can see all the stumps, and it just looks a lot different. And folks didn't want to go in there and clear cut their trees because, you know, if I clear cut some trees, and I'm younger than a lot of folks, I might not see a forest that looks like the last picture in my lifetime. It might take 50, 70, 80 years for that to grow back, and that's a big concern. Here's a little map, and all the stuff in green here is clear cuts that the Port Graham Corporation has done. And we've done a lot of clear cut in this area, and folks just don't want to do more, and it's a big concern for us. Another concern is you can see this stream here in blue, and that's a salmon stream. And we don't want to hurt our salmon in Port Graham, and I'll talk a little more about salmon. But where we can get energy from, and kind of what the community decided was, look, we don't want to go for a large electrical generation using wood. Let's start small, and let's put in some small boilers and do heat. And that's what we're in the process of doing. We're going to install, I'm not sure what it is, but something like a garden boiler. It's basically a really big wood stove with a hot water jacket around the outside. So you heat up the hot water and you pump it around the village to a couple of buildings, and you can do your heat that way. So we're not going to do electricity initially, but we will be doing heat. And for something this size, we only have to harvest 1 to 2 acres a year to save about 12,000 gallons of diesel in our community buildings for heating. And we can harvest that from low-down trees. And here's a spot of, maybe an acre. And we also got hit by the windstorms in September. I think it was a little over a year ago. Not quite like they did near Tok and Delta when they had 1 million acres blow down. We probably had 50 or 60 acres blow down, and that's enough wood for 10 years of this small-scale biomass. And we also have the edge of the old clear cuts, where there's more trees that have blown down, and little blow-down patches. And if we need to, and we get into a larger biomass system, we can harvest some of our mature timber. And I mentioned another big concern for the community is to protect salmon. And we heard a little bit about that earlier today when we were talking about subsistence. But here's a picture of someone bringing in a king. I went out with him last spring, and this was his subsistence net. And I can tell you the folks in Port Graham would rather have salmon than cheap energy. They're going to pick salmon and food over energy. They can always go cut firewood to heat their houses, but that's really the number one important thing for our village. And harvesting wood, if done in the wrong way, can impact your streams and damage your fish. We can do it in an environmentally healthy way, and that's what we're going to do. But it's a concern in the village. The other concern is wood smoke. And like Jeff showed, the boiler in Tok is clean. It's burning 10 times as much wood as the guy with the outdoor cordwood boiler, and producing less pollution. So it's a big concern for Port Graham, and I have a map here of Fairbanks. I think we're sitting around here somewhere, and this purple border is the non-attainment area around Fairbanks. Fairbanks is on the EPA. It doesn't meet EPA air quality standards. I think last year there were 17 days in the year when it didn't pass the standards for clean air. And here it's due to people burning wood and coal and then having an inversion at the same time that traps all that smoke into the area. So that's another big concern for Port Graham. But there are a lot of benefits for us in our community other than just cheap energy. The system we're going to put in is going to require one guy to feed the boiler. It's not automated. It's not using ships. It's using cordwood fire. And there's a guy who's going to have to stoke the fire every day. We're also going to hire a harvesting crew. And these guys are already doing fuels mitigation, kind of like the crew in Tok around the village. And this site that they were going to, they had to cross the river to get there. So they're loading up on the boat, and their chainsaws are stashed on the other side. We also can do some forest health improvement. I've got a picture here of a blowdown area with a bark beetle trap, and we're concerned about more spruce bark beetles getting into those blown down trees, which are kind of like ice cream for bark beetles. So right now I have to beg people for grant money so we can go cut up those trees, and maybe the biomass plant could buy that wood, and we could clean up more blown down trees without having to get grant money for it. And this area here is a clear cut. It's probably 30 years old or 40 years old. And right now there's so many trees that those trees will become unhealthy and sick. They may not grow very well. They may be more susceptible to diseases. And if we could come in and thin that out and potentially use some of that wood for biomass, that would be great too. So we want to practice active forest management, and right now we can't afford to. And the last benefit would be a small-scale timber industry. Harvesting some of the biomass, we have some high-value wood there. We might be able to load that up on a barge and send it out, start up a local sawmill, and put a few more people to work. So that's really what we'd like to see in Port Graham. So to recap real quick, we want to stabilize our energy costs so we can do economic development. The energy may not be cheaper, at least for electricity, but at least it'll be stable and will create some jobs. And at the same time, we can protect the salmon. We know we can do it with clean energy and a lack of smoke, and we can control our harvest levels. So I will turn it over to our next speaker.
Thanks very much, Nathan. Next speaker is Bryce Wrigley. Bryce is going to tell us a little bit about a different kind of biomass fuel, so instead of talking about wood all this time. Bryce is committed to increasing Alaska's food security by increasing food production and processing in Alaska. In 2011, he started the Alaska Flour Company, Alaska's only commercial flour mill. In addition to owning and operating the farm and flour mill, Mr. Wrigley is a district manager for the Salsha Delta Soil and Water Conservation District, where he oversees efforts to responsibly develop the natural resources in an area of over 3.7 million acres. In 2007, Mr. Wrigley served as president of the Alaska Farm Bureau, where he helps develop and shape agricultural policies on a national and state level. He's on the Alaska Food Policy Council, where he serves as co-chair of the local production work group, tasked with developing initiatives to increase production, processing, and marketing of local food to Alaskans. He also serves on the Plant Materials Center Advisory Board and the University of Alaska's School of Natural Resources Advisory Council. He is currently working with local farmers and the Department of Defense to promote the use of barley as a local renewable biomass fuel as a source for Fort Greely. So, Bryce.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to address you here. A little bit of background will probably be in order, just to set the stage. We, in Delta, late 70s, early 80s, an investment was made by the state in order to use some of the money that was coming in from the oil revenues to promote and to develop renewable resources, including agriculture. And so the barley project that has been talked about in past years in Delta came about. By the time the farms were cleared and the barley was being produced, the world grain market had collapsed, which was the anticipated market for all that barley. The goal was to have 375,000 acres of barley raised in Alaska by 1990. However, with the collapse of that grain market, then there was thousands and thousands of acres just in Delta alone that could not be planted because there was no market. And so we started looking for new markets. The farmers continue to raise grain and hay for livestock, but about 50,000 acres is not planted each on a yearly basis in Delta because there is no market. So that ground is kind of rotated from year to year. Certainly has a lot more capability than what is being done. So we had, in 2008, Federal Energy Management Program was passed by Congress, basically stated that federal installations should source a portion of their power, or excuse me, a portion of their energy needs from renewable resources. And in doing that, they should consider local availability, and they should also consider the impact economically to the local area. And so the vision that we kind of created for Fort Greely, and I probably should mention that about that same time, Fort Greely was due to replace one of their aging boilers. A boiler's about 50 years old, and somebody there, one of the engineers, had worked in biomass for many years, and decided that biomass would be a good fit for Fort Greely, and both in complying with the energy requirements from the Federal Energy Management Program, as well as just the cost of power. And so that kind of started the ball rolling. He contacted me. We had been doing some burning of barley in homes in Delta, kind of as instead of using pellets, we were using barley. And so we started working on that project at that point. There are a number of benefits to doing that, both from the standpoint of complying with both state and federal energy use policy and adding value and stability to the agriculture market. Barley is about half the cost per BTU of fuel oil. Fort Greely's needs are about 220 billion BTUs per year. In 2013, this year, estimated use by Fort Greely will be about 1.8 million gallons at a cost of about $6.7 million. The barley, if they go forward with the project that we're proposing, the barley would cost them about $3.2 million. And, I probably should put some of this stuff up here and get started doing stuff. There's 393,000 BTUs in a bushel of barley, which is equivalent to about 3.1 gallons. Fort Greely, as all federal installations, are required to use number 1 low sulfur diesel, which only has 125,000 BTUs per gallon. So 3.1 gallons of fuel oil in a bushel of barley. Barley, one of the advantages is that barley acts more like fuel oil than any other biomass fuel. It flows at any temperature, doesn't freeze, doesn't stack up, and so it's easy to deliver. It has a long-term storability. You can store it for 100 years as long as you keep it dry, and it stores in a small area. You could store, for Fort Greely's needs, you could store a week's worth of fuel in a bin that was about 26 feet in diameter. It's easily trucked. It's not a hazardous material, and so there's no need to comply with the hazardous material postings and things like that. It's consistent in size, uniform in size. It's consistent in moisture, and it would take about 15,000 acres based on Fort Greely's original estimate on their fuel needs, which would be a huge impact in stabilizing agriculture for Alaska. So the economic impact to our area, to the Delta area, would be from $3.2 million in direct sales annually to Fort Greely, which would generate about $12 million in economic activity. Remember, part of the Federal Energy Management Program guidelines were to consider the economic impact to the area. There's no other biomass project that would impact the local economy like that would. It would also reduce the importation of 1.8 million gallons and save the government $3.5 million, which presumably would go to debt reduction. Biomass fuel costs less than fuel oil, and this is almost universal. 50,000 acres I mentioned is fallow and delta, and so the 15,000 acres that would be required for that initial project is easily available. The ground has been cleared, the resources are there, the equipment is there, farmers are there, technology is there, the storage is there. All that is needed is a market. Lots of times I get a question about the food and fuel debate, and and people don't want to burn burn food or feed. But 5,000 acres feeds all the animals that we have in Alaska. And that's basically the amount of grain that's being grown right now. 50,000 acres is available in addition to that. And so it's not a choice between food and fuel. Both of those needs can be met out of that 50,000 acres. You would just plan on planting that. And it would be a great benefit as an anchor market. And that's really kind of what we need in agriculture, is an anchor market, something to kind of stabilize that whole thing. So in the end, this project really could boost the industry, agriculture industry, significantly. It would help keep families together and farming together on the land. Barley as a fuel has a short turnaround to success. It's immediately available within 1 year. Fort Greely's needs could be met. The land is cleared, it's available, and Delta and the Greeley area could have barley delivered at fuel delivered at half the cost of what they're paying right now. And then in addition to that, then of course, after the investment in agriculture that the state has made, then they could finally begin to realize a return on that investment. So thank you.